Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's Grant Cameron. I'm speaking to you from the west coast of Canada, my new home, and I'm talking to an old friend of mine from down south, and we're going to talk about something that started, I believe, in 1979. Tom Whitmore is my guest. He'll sort of straighten me out on this. But I first wrote about this in a book, the first book that MUFON published in 1990. We're going to get into the whole thing about the MJ-12 document, what's actually going on, and a lot of this will be new for a lot of people because a lot of people I realize have only joined since 2017, and so they think there's battles and people are fighting. They have no idea what went on in the 1980s. It's just like total warfare in terms of documents being leaked. And so Tom Whitmore we've been together on different joint podcasts, Twitter links, and all these kind of things. But I've never really interviewed Tom. And I saw I did an interview a couple of weeks back, and I said, "Wow, I just love to interview him because he and I both worked on the same subject, which is Majestic 12, MJ-12, Majority 12, whatever you want to call it." And he spent a lot more time on it than I did. And we're going to discuss this today, where he's with his research with his book, and we'll get into who knows what. We'll speculate on who knows what, where the secret may be, what the government's doing. And once again, he's been working at this a long time, the same as me, and his interest is MJ-12. So welcome, Tom, and thank you for giving me a chance to talk to you.
Thank you, Grant. It's a real pleasure to talk to you directly.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you're kind of a hard guy to follow around and get a hold of. So I'm taking this as a
That's the
real
way I got
opportunity.
it. I got my assistant that answers all my stuff. I'm always, people always watch the comments. I keep telling people, don't watch the comments. And so I'm sort of in my own little, sort of like you. I'm in my own little world where I'm researching away, and I don't really watch the email. I won't really do this kind of stuff because I find the research so exciting. You sort of discover something, you go, I figured this out,
Yes.
and it's like little pieces. And I think you probably find the same thing.
Yeah, that's the real joy of research is one thing you tend to branch off because you learn about subtopics under the topic that you're studying. And then sometimes you make a connection, and that is what is so exciting and satisfying about research.
Yeah. Have you used any of the AI tools to sort of look for leads instead of using Google?
Uh, I'm not using it for a lot of research yet, but I am using it for very simple things like as a thesaurus or different ways to say the same thing. One of the things I try to avoid in my writing is using the same word twice in a paragraph.
Yeah.
So I use it for simple things like that. And I'm not paying for AI yet because I think the field and the industry is not shaken out. The AI companies yet. There are several of them. Actually, there's a lot of them, and some of them charge money. And eventually, I'll get to the point to where it'll settle down to two or three companies that are providing AI, and then I'll figure out what to pay for. But
Yeah.
I don't see any reason to pay for it right now. Now, I do have some acquaintances that are paying for it, and they're doing deep dives, and it can save you a lot of time when you're doing research. Of course, you have to carefully check the information and make sure that you have to cross-check it against other sources that you have.
Yeah.
Make sure,
Yeah. I found
computers don't think. They only act out of their program and their algorithms. They can't use judgment. So that's where the human side comes in.
yeah. Yeah. It's sort of like this, just like a giant Akashic field where all this stuff is being gathered together. And my assistant and I just had a discussion. We did a little podcast where we talked about how many times we caught it lying and how it gets out of lying. And oh well, you're such a good researcher, you picked that up. And it's like you got to be very specific. Say, do not paraphrase. Do not make stuff up. And then they say, then the one time, I don't know, you heard this story, this is about a week ago. I was saying this and I was get so frustrated. I said, I don't want any paraphrases. I don't want any fiction. I just want you to give me the facts. I don't care what you or anybody else thinks, and just give me the facts. And then they said, oh, he snapped at me. And I said, I what? I snapped at you. And I said, come on, what, give it. I said, I'm just asking you what I want specifically. And then it comes back and it's thinking again. It shows you what it's thinking. It says, now he's really angry. He really snapped at me. It's like, and then it's playing this victim thing. I said, you're a computer. Come on, you've got no emotion. Like, what are you playing the victim role for, And it's kind of weird because it's sort of like I've talked about the left brain interpreter, where you've got the left brain where it's got two facts it knows, and in between there's a fact it doesn't know, and it just guesses and just makes it up. And that's what it's doing. So it's very good at covering stuff. And it wasn't until one day I found when it said mogul balloon. I went, mogul balloon? What did I ask about mogul balloon? I read it and I go, like, what? I said, are you using Wikipedia? And they said, no, we're not using Wikipedia. That's when I started to realize, as you said, you really got to check what they're doing. It's good to find stuff that they'll pull stuff that you never thought about, and then you just grab that and say, tell me more about this. Where's your source? Where'd you get this from? And it's sort of the problem I found is the lying, the making up stuff. And then the other thing is it just gives you so much material that you get so many threads going that you just get overwhelmed with all the material you've got.
Uh, well, and it's all overwhelming enough as it is. And I it's I trudge along, I plod along through the sources that I have, and I write outlines and write paragraphs that really don't amount to any more than a textual outline, and then I try to weave it into a narrative. And then I have to, and this is just regular scholarly type work, and then I have to weave it into a narrative that makes sense, and then attach the footnotes, go back and make sure I've got, the references in the footnotes right.
Yeah.
I started out with Google, but I finally broke down and paid to use Microsoft. So eventually, if I ever approach a publisher or
Yeah.
go to Google or something, then I'm going to need Microsoft Word. And the good thing about Microsoft Word is as you change footnotes, it automatically updates
Yeah.
them in
Yeah.
order. And you got to have that because I've gone crazy trying to keep my footnotes in proper order.
Yeah. It does have a lot of things that it's been set up to do papers and stuff like that. So it's good at that. And all the publishers know, like, you change it, you can quickly change it to a PDF before you send it in to the publisher or whatever. So publishers are aware of that, and they are used to using it. So let's start with MJ-12. MJ-12, I'll read you. The one I use four different AI things. I'll take one and I'll put it in the other one and say, what do you say about this? And see if it matches, whether they're all saying the same thing, who's your source and stuff. So the one I use most is, people get sort of upset. I use DeepSeek, which is the Chinese one that some people have claimed is the sort of the best one. But here's what they say about MJ-12. So I put it in here. While no individual has definitely confessed to forging all the MJ-12 documents, the evidence overwhelmingly points to a hoax originating within the UFO research and disinformation milieu of the early 1980s, involving figures like Bill Moore, Richard Doty, and potentially others. Key FOIA releases from the FBI, CIA, Air Force National Archives, and the General Services Office report consistently that it consistently shows no authentic government documents of MJ-12 exist. Forensic analysis by the FBI concludes that the documents were completely bogus. The provenance and content of the documents contain fatal errors, proving forgery. MJ-12 saga remains a complex, fascinating case in the UFO mythology, disinformation, and the challenge of historical research in the face of deliberate hoaxes. So take it from there and tell me your story of why you got into the MJ-12 thing, and where you went from there. Because I think that's basically your whole story. You've spent a lot of time on the MJ-12, and maybe explain to people because a lot of people may not know who MJ-12 was or what it's supposed to have been.
Yeah. Well, I got interested in UFOs when I was 12 years old when I was reading Donald Kehoe's books, and I didn't get active until around 1990. But during the 70s and 80s, I always took a lot of interest in foreign affairs. I ended up doing a lot of reading about the Soviet Union, and you can't learn anything about the Union without learning about espionage and spying and counterespionage. And I became fascinated with that. So in the 80s, I happened to turn on the TV when UFO Cover Up Live was on. And being acting out of my gullibility factor, I was very intrigued with that. And I started getting active in the UFO field around 1990, and I joined MUFON. But when I first saw the MJ-12 documents, the original set, the Eisenhower Briefing Document and the Truman-Forrestal Memo, I immediately thought that this had something to do with some or another intelligence agency. It just leaped out at me that way. And I became more involved in MUFON. I was asked to serve on the MUFON business board, which I served on from the 90s until just a couple of years ago. So, I've been through all of the MUFON developments and changes over the years, and I was married and I had a good job and raising a family, so I didn't really have the time to get into detail in some of the other developments in the later MJ-12 years, like Serpo and that kind of a thing. So after my wife unfortunately passed away in 2017, and I was able to retire, and I've been able to devote myself full time to the MJ-12 subject. And I started out by writing research papers on several different topics that I feel are at least on an ancillary basis related to MJ-12. And I actually wrote my first little research paper at Big Bend National Park in near Terlingua, Texas. But in 2019, I retired from my job and I moved to Washington, D.C. in hopes of doing research at the National Archives and at the Library of Congress. And I did some research there. The first thing I did was I pulled the Cutler-Twining memo, and I'll explain these later. But I pulled the Cutler-Twining memo out of the archives and took a good look at it. And I also made contact with the supervising archivist. I had lunch with the supervising archivist that was there at the time that the Cutler-Twining memo showed up. And this person insisted that nobody came in and planted that document from the archive site. I said, well, look, I said, maybe this is a little bit conspiratorial, but did any men in suits with earplugs and crew cuts come in and stick it there? And she said, absolutely not. And the archivists are cleared, to declassify documents as well. So I got through that part of it. And then I also spent some time going through Nathan Twining's personal papers at the Library of Congress.
Mhm.
And I got I had two hits there. One was there's the letter that Twining sent to someone with Boeing. He was going to visit Boeing. He had an appointment to visit
Oh,
there
yeah.
and couldn't make it. Something urgent had come up, and Stan Friedman had referred to that. And also, I cross-referenced that Twining gave a briefing to President Eisenhower uh, that summer before Eisenhower took office. So that gave me a real jolt. Unfortunately, COVID came along and the government shut down. I couldn't do anything there, and I had some other problems at the apartment I was living in.
Yeah.
I enjoyed living in Washington, D.C. I loved riding the metro downtown and going to the Library
Yeah.
of Congress and all that, but I got homesick for Texas, so I've moved back here in San Antonio, Texas, and I've just been working out of my office. So for people that are new to this subject, what happened was in the late 70s and early 80s, the US government was working in hard on some very highly classified programs like stealth. And after Reagan took office in the 1980s, they started working on Star Wars and God knows what other classified projects they had. And AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, one of their main tasks, other than investigating regular crimes on U.S. Air Force bases, one of their main tasks is providing security for these classified programs that the Air Force is involved in. And there was a little old guy by the name of Paul Bennewitz that lived directly next to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, Texas. I'm sorry, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he started honing in on signals. He was a physicist and very technically oriented. and he was viewing what he believed were UFOs over Kirtland Air Force Base, and he was tuning into electronic signals there. Well, he actually went to the base authorities. He was a walk-in, and they figured out what he was doing, and they figured out that they decided they needed to employ countermeasures against him. At the same time, it's apparent that AFOSI was monitoring the UFO groups and UFO researchers. And at that time, they recruited Bill Moore, who was a prominent UFO researcher at the time. He had written a book with Charles Berlitz called The Philadelphia Experiment, and he authored the seminal work of the Roswell incident, which came out in 1980. And AFOSI, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and Richard Doty in particular recruited Bill Moore. And the idea was that Moore would he would monitor the progress of AFOSI's deception program against Paul Bennewitz and report back to AFOSI, and that he would monitor the conversations and the activities of UFO researchers and UFO groups and report back to AFOSI as well. And there was supposedly a deal that in doing that, he would receive documents that nobody else could get that would provide supporting documentation to this idea of what we now call the core story, that the U.S. government had recovered one or more UFOs and their deceased occupants. So that's how it got started, and then documents started coming in to Moore and Linda Howe, another researcher, and these documents started circulating, and they reached a climax in 1984 when Moore's research associate, Jaime Shandera, received what are now known as the MJ-12 documents, and they received um, uh, a plastic canister of 35 millimeter film enclosed in an envelope, which is enclosed in another envelope, which is enclosed in a larger envelope. I've had possession of these. I've held them in my hands. And it was a roll of film, and on that film were photographs of the so-called MJ-12 documents. The first two documents were the Eisenhower Briefing Document, which was a purported briefing to President-elect Eisenhower that that a saucer had been recovered in Roswell and that a secret committee had been formed to study the problem and to manage the UFO problem, known as Majestic 12 or MJ-12. And the second document in that series is known as the Truman-Forrestal Memo, which allegedly was signed authorization by President Truman to form this MJ-12 committee. A third document arose when Bill Moore and Jaime Shandera I think they were in Suitland, Maryland at the time, and they had gotten word from Stanton Friedman that the Air Force had declassified a number of boxes of documents. I don't know how many boxes they went through, maybe 100. But in one of them, they found a document between file folders, which is not normal in the National Archives. I've been there. I've seen how they file things. You don't have just loose documents in boxes, but there was this one document that has become known as the Cutler-Twining Memorandum. And it was an alleged instruction, unsigned, by Robert Cutler, an assistant to James Lay, who was instructing General Twining about an MJ-12 meeting at the White House. So that's the basic background of the original MJ-12 story.
Okay, interesting that you had mentioned studying Soviet Union stuff, because when I was at university, my favorite course I took was criminology, and it is exactly like the UFO field. It was sort of like we used to have like, you used to learn if the guy was made the agriculture minister in Russia, in the Soviet Union, he was about to be demoted because the crop went every year. So you'd put him in that field and the crop would fail. And then you'd get moved. And it was all this fight about who's got power, who's going to the top. But it was like the UFO field. Everything was totally secret. You had to watch the players, what were the players doing. There was no public statements that were telling you what's going on. So the Russian thing, the criminology is exactly like the UFO field, and that sort of prompted me as well. Now, you talked to the archivist. What was the archivist's opinion? Because I talked to one archivist there, and he maintained that the way they sealed the Cutler Twining memo indicated that they thought it was real. The way because they took a lot of precautions on how they took care of that document. So, what did the archivist say to you in terms of that document?
Well, the archivist that I spoke with, and I'm not trying to mention the name because I've never been given permission
Yeah.
to name this person. I mean, if you anyone who really wants to find out can figure it out.
Yeah.
But this archivist wrote a memorandum and it's probably the only or one of the few documents in the National Archives that has a memorandum attached saying that it's probably phony.
Hmm.
But this memorandum stated that when this document was found, they undertook a search and they consulted with a number of different government agencies, and none of them knew about MJ-12 or would admit that they knew anything about MJ-12. And this memorandum that is attached, it advises whoever is, going to that box and looking at the Cutler 20 memorandum that, no verification had been made of its authenticity. Now, I have looked at the document and it's the print, the type is bright blue, like a carbon would be, but it is unsigned, and that's these detractors and these debunkers make a lot out of that.
Yeah.
But I've never worked in a government office, and certainly at that level, how many copies of a letter or a memorandum did they make? They probably make at least a couple of copies. And we all have printed things that aren't the final version that we have in our files. So it doesn't surprise me at all that it could be the case that it was a copy of a properly created document. Now, I can't say for sure that it's authentic because there's no official confirmation of it.
Yeah. Um, Sort of a question moving ahead, but I'll come back again. But so we've got this concept of MJ-12. You can't really prove it. And before 2017, it was sort of like the situation was we really didn't have any verification that the government was even working on UFOs. And then 2017 comes along and it all sort of breaks loose. And now they're sort of admitting legacy programs, like people like Jim Semivan, people like that are yes saying yeah there are legacy programs. So how did that change your attitude in terms of the fact that if they did have a research program and they were spending money on it, that they would have to have some sort of control group. Did your mind shift away? Because I know with me, it was always the fact that you didn't even know if there was even a control group or there was anything. Now it appears that yeah, they did spend a lot of money and they do have some sort of program to back engineer or do whatever, and they would have to have some sort of control program or somebody in charge of it.
Yeah, and I think if we put ourselves in the position, I mean, assuming that the Roswell incident is real and they recovered a craft and several bodies, maybe a live one, people would have been shocked. The people dealing with it would have been shocked. And military people, by nature, are secretive. They don't want to share any information that they think could threaten national security. So it wouldn't be abnormal at all in my mind for them to go straight to the president and say, "What do you want? What do you want us to do?"
Yeah.
And Truman could have very well said, assuming it's true, that get together the top people that are qualified to manage this problem, and form that committee and clamp a tight lid of security on it. This is secret. No one else is to know. Now, over the years, I've gotten the impression that the contact with recovered UFOs and entities, physical entities, the storage, the study of, the reporting on, that the personnel became much more diffuse. So I think it may have started out with a very small group of people. For example, I was just reading out of Vannevar Bush's biography today. The top people that ran the atomic program in World War II were just three people.
Yeah.
In MJ-12, that's kind of a lot of people too, but it's a tiny, tiny group. But I think over time, generals and admirals and deputy this and assistant that, were read in to whatever parts they needed to be read into to do the jobs that they needed to do. And it's maybe you're a scientist and something shows up and you sign a security agreement and you don't know where it came from. You don't know what it's about, but they ask you to study it, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Um, have you followed the statements made by especially guys like Jim Semivan, who claimed that he got the 7 hour briefing from the sort of the people that are the what do they call them? The subject matter experts, where they took him in 7 hours, scared to live in daylights. And he maintains that he said it's not a congressional program. It's a PED. It's a presidential emergency action document created by the president of the United States. And there's only a few of them, and none of them have ever been declassified, and no one knows what they are. Have you followed the all this stuff that goes on now? And what do you think about the whole all the rumored stories that are running around now in terms of who's running? Because everybody's trying to get to the legacy programs, which would be what MJ-12 is. You're trying to get to the actual bottom line of who's running it and what have they discovered and stuff like that. Have you watched the debates that have been going on lately?
Oh yeah. And I'm a nuts and bolts kind of a guy. I feel that we need to get official verification of recovered craft and bodies and all that before we go on to all of these other speculative areas. That's my personal point of view, and everyone wants to be read in on the legacy program, assuming that it exists. The problem is you don't get read in unless you have a need to know. At
Yeah.
least that's the principle. And it's what surprises me is some people that you would think would need to know would be read in and aren't. And then others are read in that, why was that person told this information? So, not being out there, I don't really know how they make those kinds of decisions. I think in certain areas of the military and intelligence community, it's almost an open secret because assuming that they've probably been recovering at least several craft over the years, there's no way that you can just have one tiny little group handle the whole thing. That you got to spread out. There's the engineering aspect, the material science aspect, the propulsion aspects, and then you have the biologics and the study and the anatomy, and you've got preservation of the material, securing the material. And then on the outer edges of that, you have your AFOSI types running deception programs to keep the public confused about what's really true. So yeah, I follow that. I mean, that's what I do. I live and breathe this stuff.
As do I. And that's I guess where we go. I want to ask you a question about you mentioned Bennewitz and his communication. I don't know if you've heard have you heard the interviews that Bill Moore gave to Greg Bishop in about 2004, 2005, where they were talking about this, and this idea that Bill Moore had been recruited to work with AFOSI, and he said I wasn't the only guy. There's lots of other people, and the statement that he claimed that the computer, and you got to remember this is before laptops and stuff like that. This is 79, where he claimed that the computer that Benowitz got was given to JL and Hynek. Did you ever follow that up and get any indication whether that was true, that Hynek was actually involved in this disinformation scheme as well?
Yeah, I know that's the conventional wisdom. Richard Doty takes a different position. He claims that Hynek only gave Bennewitz a computer monitor.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now, if you read, I'm fortunate to have an extensive file, Barry Greenwood's extensive MJ-12 file, and in that file are several letters written by Paul Bennewitz to these, people that he was writing to, and he mentioned, I think in a letter to Jim Lorenzen at APRO about his computer, and he actually gave the brand name. I don't have it in front of me right now, but it's a European company, and the company is still in existence. And I think maybe what Benowitz was doing was he had some kind of a computer set up and maybe a printer, and then maybe Hynek brought him a monitor. Okay, and somehow they hooked that up. I don't know how you do that because it's not plug and play. Back then, it wouldn't have
Yeah.
been plug and play the way it is now,
Yeah.
where you just plug something into the back of your computer or something. But Benowitz was apparently pretty technically savvy, so I wouldn't be surprised if he found a way to make it work. But that's
How,
the version that Richard Doty has.
okay. So how many times you talked to Richard Doty in your investigation?
I haven't counted it, but here's the problem, Grant. Uh, in my work and in any historian's work, and I'm not a trained historian, I don't have a degree in history, but you're dealing with sources of information, and a lot of at least the first chapters of this whole saga occurred during the late 70s and early 80s. That was 40 years ago. Okay. Some people are deceased. Some of the people involved won't cooperate. Now, Richard Doty will cooperate, and he's a friendly man. He's personable. He's polite, and he's cooperative. Now, I started out by going through all of these YouTube interviews that he had given, and I was writing down notes, and I have over 100 pages of material of various claims that he's made. And we eventually made contact on Facebook Messenger, and occasionally I'll ask him a question, and if he knows an answer, he'll tell me his version or his claim of what happened. Now, we've got to remember that Richard Doty was actually there. He participated in these activities during the 1980s, and he did work for AFOSI, even though it didn't end well for him. And that's a real plus in working with Richard Doty. But at the same time, I think I have to, and everyone has to carefully sift and judge, the quality of information that we're getting there.
How you've heard his stories? He's been talking for 40 years. Have you found his stories to be consistent over the years? He tells about the briefing, for example. He tells about the 1979 briefing that he got. He's told that story. I've heard it 20 times. He's told that story. I mean, do you
Yeah.
find his stuff consistent, or is he bouncing around with his stories?
I think that story has been pretty consistent because that particular story, I haven't heard him embellish that any more than what I've heard him say on these podcasts and what he said to me. Um, and the story was basically that he was called into a briefing on Kirtland Air Force Base. He never said how many people were in the briefing room, how many people were briefed, but other people were briefed as well. That a colonel came down from Washington, D.C.,
Mhm.
and he received a packet of information, and then they were led through films of Roswell and pictures of aliens, and told the alleged truth about the UFO reality. And I it, if that happened to me or you or anybody else, I think it would make a big impression. But one question I have is, why is Richard Doty the only person from AFOSI or the government talking about this stuff the way that he does? That's one question I've never been able to answer.
That's a good question. I don't really have an answer for that. Do
I,
you think um he's always talking about the fact that he's a new guy, he's not lying anymore. Do you think he's on the straight and narrow now in terms of what he's saying?
I think that, well, let me say this. There are people in the community that believe that he's just an out and out compulsive liar.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't go that far. I like Richard. I like Rich. I know Bill Moore liked Rick, and they liked each other. I think Rick likes me. My daddy told me many years ago. He said, "You catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar."
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't have any personal reason to embarrass Rick or to cause problems for him. But my responsibility as someone trying to write something halfway credible for the UFO community, I am going to have to weigh the credibility of many of his claims. Now, one of the problems is that uh, a lot of Rick's claims can't be verified. There's just no way.
Mhm.
And I tried to make contacts with AFOSI people. I wrote a little research paper about AFOSI, which is on my blog site, and you can read it. And I turned up what information I could. There's not a whole lot of information about AFOSI per se out there. And there is even an Air Force Office of Special Investigations Facebook page, uh, and you didn't have to be AFOSI to join it. So I joined it, and 2 days later, people had already figured out that I was a UFO guy, and they kicked me off. But I did make a couple of other contacts. I made a wonderful contact with a gentleman that wrote his whole personal history and his career in the Air Force and AFOSI. He ended up being a polygraph examiner, really became an expert. He was a great guy. But by and large, those people don't talk very much. And another problem is a lot of the people that Rick Doty worked with in AFOSI that were active at the time, they're deceased now.
Yeah. In his interview with Stephen Greer in 2016, he mentions that the initial briefing he got was under a code name Yankee Black. And he did an interview with a friend of mine last year, which hasn't been released yet, a long sit-down interview. And he also talked about Yankee Black. And now in the latest Wall Street Journal piece, they've talked about Yankee Blue, this disinformation hazing program that they ran with showing people a UFO, no, an alien person or whatever, and that it was all just a joke and stuff like that. And we've confirmed that Yankee White actually exists. That's the White House. It's an extra interview you have to go through and check, like a background check in terms of if you're working close to the president. Did that ever come up in your research, this Yankee Black and Yankee Blue? And did Richard Doty ever talk to you about it?
Not those code words. Rick has said that after I guess the Yankee Black briefing that he received,
Yeah,
he went back to the office. Now, this is his story.
yeah.
He went back to the office and he talked to his supervisor, and his supervisor said, "What do you think?" And Rick said, "Well, supposedly he said, you know, are they is this a joke? Are they trying to fool us? Are they trying to disinform us, or what are they doing?" And his boss said, "No, it's real." You know. Of course, was it really real? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, now I will say this, and Rick Doty he's been participating in these Twitter spaces. He'll talk for hours. People
yeah,
ask him questions for hours, and he's mentioned that the code name of he mentioned the code name of the thing involved with the Bennewitz operation, which just now slipped my mind. But um, I'll think of it in a minute. But I
yeah,
took that code name he actually gave me about 5 code names, and uh, I wrote them all up and I sent them to various government agencies requesting information. And they came back and said that you're requesting too much. Come back, simplify your request. So uh, yeah, it's Seven Lambs was the name of the code name of the Bennewitz operation.
Ah,
So I wrote back to an agency and I mentioned Seven Lambs, and the reply was, "We can neither confirm nor deny that project existed, and the information is properly classified."
oh,
So what does that make you think?
yeah,
Did it exist or
yeah,
not?
yeah. It
You
makes you
know,
wonder, eh?
yeah.
Have you ever filed for Bill Moore's FBI? If you've seen it, I've got a copy. I filed for it, and I sent them the first 3 pages of it, which had the code, the number, the file number on it and everything. And they came back and said, because you didn't provide us enough information, we're closing the request. And then, of course, I went back with a an appeal, sent them the entire 7 pages that I have, and I haven't heard anything yet. So I'm waiting for someone else to file for Bill Moore's FBI file. Stanton Friedman's, of course, was released, and there was all these black pages in it. But Moore's, as you probably know, it was 61 pages, and I think 55 were withheld. B1 national security, exempt, totally exempt, 55 pages.
Uh,
So I was just wondering whether you had filed for it, and
no, I haven't filed for it because I've kind of gone off the remarks that you've made, that you had tried to get additional information and you were frustrated that they wouldn't release any more. But here's one of the issues, and Doty has pointed to this, but there may have been some UFO issues involved in the whole Moore-Bennewitz thing, but there was also espionage and counterespionage.
yeah.
And um, Moore, people had been wondering for years who was Falcon, the code name Falcon. And at first, people believed that it was Richard Doty.
Yeah.
And Bill Moore's friend, Greg Bishop, got Bill Moore to tell him finally who Falcon was. And Moore told his friend, Greg Bishop, that Falcon was this person by the name of Harry Rositsky.
Mhm.
And Harry Rositsky was a real person who he was CIA and he specialized in Soviet affairs and he had actually run agents in the Eastern Bloc. What that tells me is that if that's true, if Moore was working with Rositsky, there was some kind of Soviet connection in there.
Mhm.
In Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, he does mention that Moore would receive postcards from Russia, and then he'd take the postcard and call into some number, and they'd say thank you very much. And Moore allegedly knew at least some Russian. I don't know how fluent he
Yeah, I
was.
thought he was fluent. Yeah, that's what I heard.
Yeah, but that's never really been verified either. Um, so the FBI file may have more to do with, these maybe these connections with Russia or connections with counterespionage. Now, Rick Doty has mentioned to me that in Paul Bennewitz's business in Thunder Scientific Labs that there was a Chinese worker in there who admitted that he had been in contact with another Chinese person at a New Mexico university that had been gathering information for the mainland China government. And the FBI got this guy out of Bennewitz's office and he agreed to cooperate. And they got the other guy that way. So there's, what I'm trying to say is there's an espionage element and a counter-espionage element. And at the same time, you have these highly classified things going on. Like, for example, and this is in Bishop's book where they were running these lasers out of Kirtland Air Force Base and blinding Soviet satellites when they came over the base. So uh, I think AFOSI and maybe NSA, they were running these deception programs to get people thrown off the track. They think they're dealing with UFOs and all this UFO stuff when really, these government agencies are protecting their classified programs. Now,
Mhm.
that's not to say there are no UFOs involved in this. There very possibly are. But I think we need to keep in mind that the government works very hard to protect their classified programs.
Yeah. And then there's always the question, because I looked at all that too, and the way I saw it was Bennewitz was seeing UFOs over the Monsanto weapons storage area, which is the biggest repository for nuclear weapons in the world. And that they couldn't let go. But when I looked at Project Beta, there's two code names that are used, and one was Project Rainbow. And I looked up Project Rainbow, and had nothing to do with UFOs, had nothing to do with satellites, had to do with paint that was being used on the stealth the U-2 spy plane. And so you got to wonder how many, like when you go back again and interview Doty, he gives you another scam on top of a scam, and then you can never get the bottom line story that they say, okay, this is what we were really doing, and it was just another made up story as to what they were doing, and it's pretty hard to determine unless they actually release the documents, which they haven't released the documents. Because I heard the one that they were making satellites go the wrong direction or making them go,
Yeah,
uh,
reprogramming them out of
yeah,
their
and I in the 1980s, I just can't see that they had that kind of technology. I mean, it's still satellite even today is still very much like a rock. I mean, it's just going in one direction. Unless you got retro rockets, it's going to keep going in the same direction. It's not like you can make a right hand turn and take off or whatever. So that was always a question of mine. Now you're famous for being maybe the last guy to talk to Bill Moore. So tell me that story. What were you able to get out of Bill Moore?
No, I haven't been successful with Bill Moore at all. I tried to, what I did was I found out that Greg Bishop was a friend of Bill
Yeah.
Moore's. And I approached Greg Bishop and I said, could you introduce me to Bill Moore? And he said, well, what I can do is you can send me, he agreed that you can send me three questions. You can send me three questions. His, his majestic self uh, allowed me to submit three questions to him through Greg Bishop, which I did. And I sat for a year and got no reply. So I just got on the email. I figured out what his email was. And I pinged him about MJ-12. And he came back saying that you're fishing in very dark waters and wouldn't cooperate at all. Um, so that's the way it is. And Doty tells me that Moore absolutely will not discuss UFOs with anybody. In fact, that this is a story that Doty tells, but that a news lady approached him, I think in California, and tried to make contact. And he called the police. And Moore is well into his 70s now.
Yeah.
So, and that's most unfortunate.
Well, why do you think the switch? Because you know the story that when people say, "Okay, I can't get anywhere, I'm quitting," and we always make the joke, "Don't worry, you're coming back. Nobody leaves." And Moore was the one guy who actually, in about '94, when no, well, 89 he left, but did a couple of interviews, 2004, 2005, but didn't come back. I mean, he basically just stuck to it. So why do you think? Was he threatened? Is he still being paid by the government, or why would he completely cut off? Because you would think that eventually he'd get over whatever is bugging him, and because he was always the guy that thought he was going to figure this thing out, and um, so is it he doesn't want to release what he knows, or what do you make of him disappearing from the scene?
Yeah, good question. I think a lot of us wonder that. I think I heard him in one interview say that he felt like he learned as much as he was going to learn. And he had other interests. For example, I'm told that he wrote a book about the Mormon
Yeah, he did.
Church,
Yeah.
and it's never been published. And I was wondering why. Doty told me that it was not complimentary about the Mormon Church and that the Mormon Church bought him off. In other words, they bought the book from him.
Okay.
Um, I think it's a distinct possibility that Moore realized he had been played himself. During the 80s, when he was working these contacts and these government contacts, that he thought he was burrowing into the inside world of,
Yeah.
UFO secrecy, and he was being promised all this stuff, these real life documents that would prove the reality of the government UFO cover-up. And he didn't get very many documents in return, and I think maybe he realized he'd been played. And at the same time, he had been subjected to a lot of ridicule from the doubters and skeptics like Barry Greenwood and Phil Klass and all those types. And he may have just become disgusted. Also, he didn't have a real high opinion of UFO researchers in
That's
general.
right.
He's at least in the 80s, he was rather arrogant. And based on the replies I received from him, I have to say that he's still arrogant.
Yeah, yeah, he did have a big ego, and that part of what my idea was that he went from the top researcher around to right to at the bottom in one speech. Just like and his ego couldn't take the fact that people were throwing stuff at him and telling him to get off, and he suddenly went from to the bottom, and he couldn't take it. But I made one contact with him just after he left, and I was going to be in California and I asked him for an interview, and he said, basically, I guess, so what he was telling you. He said, we've been friends for years, but I didn't figure it out. You're not going to get anywhere. If I didn't figure it out, you're not going to get anywhere. Something like that. So like,
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure.
but he was a smart guy. I think you'll admit that. He did his research. He was very detailed and sort
He
of
was a terrific researcher,
yeah.
terrific investigator. And
Um, yeah,
I want to say this, Grant. I think people forget today, UFO people see disinformation and CIA behind every tree, psyops and all this. It wasn't like that before the 80s.
yeah,
It wasn't until Bill Moore went public and admitted that Doty and AFOSI and these government agencies were penetrating and using the UFO groups. It wasn't until then that people really started thinking that way.
yeah.
And
And
I think that may be his most significant contribution.
yeah,
But you got to try to keep a level head.
yeah. That was
And
the thing. That's true. Everybody criticizes Bill Moore, but before Bill Moore read that speech, everybody believed all the stuff that he was talking about. And they were also embarrassed by the fact that he's saying you guys have been had, because that's what he said. You guys have been had. And people don't realize that they haven't. And I want to ask you about now. So now, then he was seen like he was the devil incarnate because he worked for the government. And now you have like every second person's got a government insider and they're getting material and they believe what these people are saying and they're going to get more material. And these guys have told us stuff that it doesn't make any sense to me that if you've got a security clearance that high, that you're going to go to Tom or to Grant and say, I've got this high security clearance and I'm going to violate my security oath and tell you everything that's going on. That never made any sense to me that somebody would come out and violate their security oath to tell you, and you're not even a government official. I mean, if you've got the secret, why don't you go to the New York Times or Washington Post? Why are you coming to me with, I'm just some little researcher and give out the most highly classified secret there is. So what do you think about what's going on today in terms of there's just so many whistleblowers and so many people that claim that, they got secret sources and these people are coming forward. And it's basically the Bill Moore thing all over again. He had, a couple of sources. And then along came Tom DeLonge, which was like a recopy of the thing where a bunch of guys came to Tom DeLonge and said, same thing they said to Bill Moore, we're here to help you. We're here to direct you. And they sort of give him instruction. And that's all like Tom DeLonge was a great guy. Bill Moore was the scum of the earth because he did it. And Tom DeLonge was seen as this great, wonderful guy that unveiled all these people. And yet when you look at the evidence, Tom DeLonge didn't find any of those people at all. They gave him all those people. They gave him these two people that, at the Pentagon area to see. Then they sent them to NASA and then they went to Ames and then they were sending them all over the place. He found the first guy, but he didn't find anybody after that. They just sort of let him around and all these people offering to help him.
yeah, and before I talk about now, back then, they received, there's what we call the Carter Briefing Document
Yeah.
and the Aquarius Telex and the Eisenhower Briefing Document, Truman-Forrestal Memo, uh, Color 20 Memo. Some of these are stamped top secret. Do you think if Moore and company were receiving genuinely classified documents illegitimately,
Yeah.
somebody would have gotten in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
nobody got in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that tell you?
Yeah.
They're not really classified documents.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to say there's not any correct information in them. They very well may have some correct information, but the documents were authentic. Now, the world we're in now is completely different with social media. Anybody can go on social media and run a podcast or go on Twitter and make claims, and you can do it anonymously. You don't have to use your name. And it's just it's like the Wild West now with social media. And as for the whistleblowers, there's a very simple test. Okay, you have a claim. What supporting evidence do you have? Okay, do you have supporting evidence? Do you have supporting documentation? Do you have corroborating witnesses? Just basic stuff.
Mhm.
How much of that, how much of that have we actually seen?
Yeah.
Big goose egg.
Have you had
Okay.
anybody approach you in terms of wanting to give you stuff?
No, I wish they would. That would that would make me feel like I'm getting somewhere.
I had the same thing. It's like, it must not be important because nobody's contacting me either. I had one phone call, and that was I guess, a question that we can ask about my friend Ron Pandolfi, where one of his sort of associates or whatever phoned me up and said, U.S. intelligence asked me to talk to you. And I said, do you realize I'm a Canadian? He said, well, yeah. And I said, so U.S. intelligence is saying to talk to a Canadian. Are you kidding me? Do you think I'm stupid? Like, and so quite big question there is what, as I said, the biggest question in ufology is not what are UFOs, is what's Ron Pandolfi doing. So let's get your opinion. What do you think Ron Pandolfi's doing?
Publicly, I'm gonna pass. Um, I don't know Ron Pandolfi. I do have a friend that I had dinner with, and he actually gave me a picture of him having dinner with Ron Pandolfi and some other people.
Yeah.
I know a little bit about Pandolfi. I know that he had a lot of interactions with Kit Green. They were sequential at the CIA at the
Yeah.
Weird Desk. And that's really all I know, and I really don't want to say anymore. Sorry.
He is the he's the guy that holds the keys. That's what he says. And I've been give you an example of how this may all link together. You know the story about Bill Moore with the hotel room with where he said you got 18 minutes or 17 minutes or whatever, and he takes the quarter and he puts the quarter in and that's the Aquarius briefing document. So he puts the quarter in, and that's happened again. It happened about last year, middle of last year. Hotel room in Albuquerque, read the document, and they're still doing the same thing again. And so where that sort of has gone really nowhere. It was supposed to be almost like the Bill Moore thing again. We're going to put you in contact with all these people and stuff like that. So it's the same sort of thing. And one of the things that was in the document, because I was actually on a Zoom conference watching this guy read the document as this was going on. It was just like right out of a spy school. And he said what was the word, ambassador, the ambassador. And I said, the ambassador. I said, that's Doug Alt. That's Ron Pandolfi's friend. How would they know? How would this document? How would they know who the ambassador is? This is a joke thing between Ron Pandolfi and Doug Alt about they went to a facility that Ron was working at, and he's supposed to sign. Everybody had to sign in. So he said, "How should I sign in?" And he said, "Put down the ambassador." So he signs the ambassador, and then supposedly Ron Pandolfi said after all these people were asking, "Who's the ambassador that was with you?" And so when this was in this document, this guy was reading on camera and in this hotel room in Albuquerque, and he said ambassador. I said, "Hey, it's Ron Pandolfi behind this stupid document." So this is the old idea. They're still doing the same thing, and every once in a while it runs into back to Ron Pandolfi, and you wonder, is he behind this? Which I guess would lead to another question you might be able to answer, and that is, do you believe there's this gradual leaking of material? Do you believe that they're putting material out there and pulling it back? This, acclimatization thing. Do you think that's going on?
I think it's possible. And through the 90s and 2000s and all that, I felt that It was like the government had one foot on the accelerator and one foot on the brake,
Yeah.
and just alternating, you know. Um, and it would, if they really do have deep dark secrets that we need to eventually know, it would make sense to gradually acclimate the public
Yeah.
to the information. But they've done such a good job of confusing everybody. It's gotten to the point where you just don't know what to believe anymore,
Yeah.
and
Well,
especially with social media.
yeah,
And
well, they do
so,
spend whatever $50 billion a year, and I keep warning people. I said, like, you think you're going to outmaneuver these guys, that you're so smart or whatever. And I said, you got to remember, these guys have been doing this since World War II, and they know exactly how to run an operation, and they know exactly what they're doing, and they're like 10 steps ahead of you. You think you're doing it, and they control the whole thing. They're not stupid people that are running these operations, and it's like I mean, Eric Davis says now, where if he's accurate figures, he said they spend 10 times the amount of money on security for a program as they do for the program, which would indicate, and you say to people, okay, you think there's UFOs. Well, okay, name the security program that's spending all the money that's doing this. And everybody forgets that there's a security program that's overlapping the UFO program that's there just to throw mud in the water all the time.
uh-huh. And Bill Moore, in his 1989 talk, he explained how he thought he could work his way in,
Yeah,
from the outer rings to the inside. And it didn't seem to occur to him that he was the amateur and they were the professionals.
yeah,
And you're one person and you're going to beat the military industrial intelligence complex
yeah.
out of their secrets. It's just not likely. And I think maybe later it dawned on him and he became disillusioned that he himself had been played.
Yeah, especially after that speech. I mean, he did say that, I guess it was written by whoever, and they told him to give it, that that this was part of the plan. But it leads to another question. This idea that they're doing acclimatization and they put stuff out, and one of the stories is that they take the MJ-12 document and all that stuff, and they start to work on John Lear, and then Lear gets involved with Lazar, and Lazar supposedly goes up to the base and brings back the material to Lear. Lear is talking about the fact they've got UFOs at Area 51, and nothing happens until George Knapp is missing a guest in May of 1989. He said, "Bring your friend on TV. I need a guest tonight." And it all goes viral. And suddenly everybody in the world is coming there, and they have to take land away to move people away from the base, because everybody's on up top of the mountains looking down at the base and stuff. So what's your opinion on Area 51? What's your take on what actually happened there?
Okay. Well, you're asking me.
Yeah, well, because
No, no,
you're familiar with this disinformation thing, and you must see it in view of Bill Moore, because Bill Moore was there when this was all happening, and we were asking him about Lazar and stuff, and he was answering questions, and then supposedly he had landed he told Lee Graham that he'd landed at Area 51, and he drew this. He called it the Goose, a plane that he'd seen at Area 51. Bill Moore drew this. We got this drawing that Bill Moore had made of this plane that was there and stuff. So he was sort of tied into it as well. And then it was the same year, it was in 1989, when Lazar went public, I guess, in May. And then the conference was in whatever, July or August. So it all blew up at the same time. And it's sort of the same tie-in where, like, for example, they were using the magic patches there. What is it called? MAJ
well,
patches.
MAJ is not necessarily a big deal. That just stands for Major Command. You have MAJCOM. So MAJ in and of itself is not necessarily a UFO
Okay.
designation, but it does correlate with Majestic and Magic and all that. But as for Area 51, here's something I'd like to share with you, and I'm not casting aspersions and I'm not making accusations, but I am floating an idea
Okay.
that Richard Doty told me that one of the things that AFOSI does is where AFOSI is basically on every Air Force base. And one of the things they do is they cultivate the local media, the local radio and TV stations, because occasionally they may need to use them to get information or to put information out. Uh, our Las Vegas guy was Las Vegas TV station guy. Is it possible that he could have been recruited by AFOSI as an informant himself? Okay, and maybe that's where we got all of this confusion with Lazar and Area 51 and John Lear and all these things.
You're indicating Knapp, you mean would
Yeah,
be,
George
oh,
Knapp.
okay. I hadn't thought about that. No, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, just a possibility.
Yeah, but it sort of backfired. I mean, the whole thing sort of blew up. That's what Knapp said. If this was disinformation, if this was to throw people off the scent, it sure fire the guy that came up with that idea because it was just like went viral. Suddenly, everybody in the world is coming there, and if you want to keep a program secret, the last thing you want is like 50 TV networks standing at the gate of Area 51 asking for interviews. It's almost like an Epstein thing. It just went totally viral.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. But this whole business of Lazar, being hired on Area 51 and the whole story is so murky that it for me it's hard to make any sense out of it. It just doesn't make any sense because he's never supported his academic credentials. And I can understand why they might want to hire somebody that's kind of, off color, so to speak,
Yeah,
kind of off
exactly.
the charts. But he's never documented any substantial scientific education. And it just doesn't make any sense to
Yeah.
me.
But that's the kind of guy you would hire. You would hire because he had a pirate flag and he was, blowing stuff up and like you want the thing to fall apart when it goes public that when he goes public. I mean, as I always say, I mean, if you really want the story told, go to the Washington Post and the New York Times. You don't go to some guy who's like, he doesn't have degrees and you realize he doesn't have degrees. Well, you feed him a bunch of stuff and you put it out and you know that once he goes public, they're going to realize he doesn't have the degrees and it's all going to melt down and go crazy. But this one didn't work because it was George Knapp instead of Lazar carrying the story because John Lear had the story from December of 1988 till May of 89. And he was telling this whole story about the get, crafts at Area 51 and stuff like that. And nobody believed him because it was like, John Lear's crazy. Who's going to believe John Lear? But then suddenly KLS TV tells the story, and suddenly it goes viral. And it's like, oh, it's a different person telling the story now. So it's part of this, I guess, this thing that's been going on. And nowadays, I don't know if you agree with me. I mean, nobody really pays any attention to that. The fact that they're up against this major operation, and everybody thinks all these people that are coming forward are, really good guys, and they're here to help us, and they're violating their security oaths. It doesn't make any sense to me that this guy's decided he doesn't like how they're running the program, so he's going public. I mean, it's like if you were in World War II and you said, "Well, I don't like how they're building an atomic bomb. I'm going to go tell everybody what's going on." You can't just walk out of a program and start telling people what's going on. Who cares what you think? You're a GS-15 or you're whatever. Shut up and do what you're told. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that you get to come forward because you don't agree with how UFOs are being handled and you're going to tell the world what's actually going on.
Yeah, and that was I guess you could call it a legend, a cover story that uh, these intelligence people were using during the 80s. Hey, we don't like the UFO secrecy. We don't
Yeah.
agree with the cover up. We want you to help us get the information out.
Yeah.
And then you take these naive UFO believers, and I'm one of them,
Yeah.
and they go, oh my God, wow, I'm really onto something here. I'm going to
Yeah.
do this. And I read a book by a guy that wrote about atomic secrecy, nuclear secrecy, and in his introduction, he discussed how when you do that kind of historical work, you have a choice between doing it open source or being allowed to view classified information. And he decided to just go open source because if you if you if you agree if they agree to let you look at classified information, you're locked in.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. You've signed your life away,
Yeah.
and you can't share it. So you may learn some stuff that other people don't know, but uh, you can't really share it because you've signed a confidentiality agreement.
Yeah, and that's what's happened to Congress. I mean, Congress is yelling about this We need to get in a skiff with these people, and then you get them in the skiff, and they come out and say, "Well, what did you learn?" I can't tell you. Now they're locked in, and they can't say anything. And it's just this repetitive nonsense where just more and more, a few more people know a few more secrets, but the security system has to work. I mean, maybe not in this the latest administration. The rules are a little bit different, but in a regular administration, I mean, you got people who leak one page of a document or something, and they end up with 5 years in jail and stuff like this. I mean, this is serious stuff. And to say you're going to leak all this stuff, which leads to another question. I don't know if I ever asked you about this or I heard you talk about this before. There was not only the MJ-12 document, there was 3,700 pages of stuff called the new Majestic 12 documents. So that is sort of like is real mud in the water. Did you do any work on that and in terms of looking at all that stuff that was running around in the 1990s and early 2000s?
That's another sad story. Um, I approached Timothy Cooper and I guess I approached him wrong, but he won't cooperate with me either. And he won't say who his sources were. Uh, I don't know why, because they're all deceased now.
Yeah,
And even in the 90s, that was 30 years ago. You know, what's the big deal? But he won't disclose his sources. Uh, and the documents themselves make fascinating reading.
yeah,
The problem is, like I know I keep saying that, there's a problem with everything in this. Uh, it could be disinformation that was forwarded to the Soviets. And the Russians were probably smart enough to know that most of the information in there was BS, but by planting a document through an agent, through a double agent perhaps, they could trace where the document went and where it ended up
yeah,
in Russia, in what building, in what department, in what division. And you put out, you create something spectacular sounding, and the ambassador looks at it, oh my God, I got to send this over to, Russia.
yeah,
And US has UFOs.
yeah,
Um, and that may be one of the things that was going on. Um, I think that the Timothy Cooper documents, uh, they do provide a terrific opportunity to do further forensic research. And I'm not a trained forensic analyst, and I haven't in my writing schedule, I haven't gotten to that yet. That whole
yeah.
question of the Timothy Cooper documents. Now, Ryan Wood and Robert and Ryan Wood have done a lot of work on it. And on their website, majesticdocuments.com, they have a timeline of who the source and when the document was received and when the batch was received. But the sources are like S1 and S2 and
Yeah.
Can't Wheel, which is it's a pseudonym. So we don't really know who is who. Now there's an Australian person by the name of Jeff Cruikshank. Are you familiar with him?
No, no, I'm not.
Well, he wrote up a very long preface, and it was posted, I think, on Reddit or one of those places for quite a while. But he speculated that who source S1 and S2 and Kent Wheel and all those people were.
Wow.
And they're if you like, Grant, I'll be glad to send you what information I have on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
It,
I'm about to interview Ryan Wood. If you want to interview, you want to come in on the interview, I'm about to interview Ryan Wood. So,
okay.
um, and I think you got Robert Wood's files, correct? You photocopied them or something?
Yeah, I did. I photographed them. Yeah.
Was there anything spectacular in there in terms? You just got the MJ-12 stuff or all his stuff?
I got his MJ-12 file. Bob Wood, I consider Bob Wood to be a dear friend of mine. We served on the MUFON board together,
Yeah,
and he asked Bill Moore if he would sell him his file, Bill Moore's file. And Bob Wood paid him some money. I won't quote how much, but Bill Moore supposedly gave him his file. I don't think he gave him everything. I really don't. Because going through Bob Wood's stuff, there's got to be a whole lot of notes and transcriptions and things that should have been in there that weren't. But I do have cool things like I have photographs of the Carter briefing document with a quarter on the in the
Yeah.
corner,
Yeah.
photographs that Bill Moore took. I've got cool stuff like that. But the thing that interested me the most, it's not even MJ-12 related, but there was material that the Woods, I think, pulled up out of the National Archives about an FBI file on Albert Einstein. Because in the 30s, when Einstein was still working in Germany, apparently he had a secretary that was passing information to the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And I don't know if Einstein was aware of that or not, but I thought that was really interesting.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. So let's sort of wrap this up and get you to go where are you talking about your book and what you expect? Is this a couple year project yet, or is there anything that you need from people that you are looking for information that in terms of helping you do research and or where are you at with your book? Is it just going to be MJ-12 or are you going to do the whole?
It's a popular history of the MJ-12 controversy and perspectives on MJ-12. So
Okay.
that the first half is going to be a popular history of the MJ-12 controversy. And then the second half is going to be research papers that I've written and that I will adapt as perspectives on MJ-12 and some other material as well. I want to write at least 20 chapters. I've written almost three, so it's going to be a while before I'm doing everything. I don't have a research assistant,
Yeah.
so I'm doing it all myself. To help me, please call Bill Moore or Timothy Cooper at 3 a.m. and ask them to give me a call.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, Cooper, I didn't really follow. I knew Bill Moore pretty well, but Cooper and I talked to Ryan. There was some interesting documents when they showed me. There was one the connection to Lundall that where he showed me this document where they'd misspelled LeMay's name wrong, but it was dealing with the National Photographic Interpretation Center. And I remember to Ryan, I'm going, "Can I get a copy of that document?" Because I knew it. Nobody else would have known what the National Photographic Interpretation Center. That's where they channeled the alien in 1959. So I sort of there was all these weird sort of things, but it was a lot of material. So everybody was always saying it was Richard Doty. And I said, well, if it's Richard Doty, he's pretty prolific that he can produce this kind of material. There was an agency producing that, all those documents and putting them out and stuff like that. That was a major operation. So hopefully you can put some material in there in terms of because that seemed to be part of the whole story. It seemed to be the story of MJ-12 and all of the history. If you look back, some of the documents that go back to the history of the early generals and stuff like that, and Einstein and uh, Oppenheimer and these documents that they had that everyone had a problem with it, which is always my assessment was like the MJ-12 document. You can change one word, or like you were talking about following papers, so you can change one period, put an extra period in the document, and then let it circulate, and you can see where the document's going to actually go. And it was very easy just to change one or two words in the document and then circulate it and then say it's a hoax because it is a hoax and yet the material that's is sort of reliable. And I guess it went south for me when I found out that there was probably a good chance there was a live alien there. So the four dead aliens were, you know, there was that mistake in the document that they were just using the general knowledge of what happened at Roswell to produce this document. So I spent a lot of time in the 80s. That's all we did was trying to track this document and follow back because there was the conversations going on between Stan Friedman and Phil Klass and Bill Moore, and all these letters are going back and forth, and Moore was defending all these different things in the documents and stuff like that. And it was a lot of work, and Moore produced that paper. I don't know if you got a copy. It was I don't know how
The
many pages.
MJ-12 documents and analytical review.
Yeah, it was like hundreds of hundred page, hundred some odd pages. It was a pretty detailed sort of thing, which indicated that Bill was deeply looking into it. It wasn't something where later on he may have saw it was a hoax, but he was trying to figure this out and track all these people. And then all the bird code came in and the aviary idea and all that kind of stuff started to come in, and it just
Can I
it
ask you one question?
yeah, sure.
Um, John Alexander Do you know how he got connected with the aviary? Because he was in the meeting that was held at Ernie Keller Strauss House in 1986. Do you know where the connection was made there?
No, but my idea of the aviary was it was just Bill Moore had because then it was there was no internet or anything, so everything was done by mail or it was done by phone. And they always believed their phones were tapped. So him and Jaime Shandera, my understanding of the aviary was that they gave everybody that they were talking to. So Bill Moore was talking to John Alexander, and he was talking to Puthoff, and he was talking to all these different people, and they would give everybody a code name so that when they talked about whoever they were talking to, they didn't have to you produce the person's name. So that would be my understanding, and I learned about it from Habib Azadadel, the British he claimed to be, Iranian intelligence, who phoned me up at 3 o'clock in the morning to tell him about the Avery, that he had solved this thing. And he talked to John Alexander and he talked to all these different people. And he was giving me the list of names of who was each bird. So that was my understanding. He just got sort of dragged in because he was one of the people that Bill Moore was talking to. And so Bill Moore gave him this name that none of these people, I think John even stated that we didn't know we were the birds. We didn't know what our name was. It wasn't until later when all these documents started to circulate that I remember talking to CB Scott Jones because they always thought he was the Falcon. And then when Rositsky was named as the Falcon, then I contacted Jones. I said, "Hey, you're off the hook. You're not the Falcon anymore." And he said, "That's good." But then they gave him another name, and it was just this thing. It was trying to figure out who was who. And even if you look at um, the hummingbird was supposedly Jacques
Yeah,
Vallée. And if you look in Jacques Vallée's journals, he uses the hummingbird. He's got like on the top of his thing, the hummingbird.
yeah,
So some of these names may have been correct, but to me, it was always had to do with Bill Moore playing this spy game that
yeah.
because he said to me, and I think he was public about it. He said, you either get in the game and play or you don't get in the game and play. And you know that there's a chance that you're not going to get it. But they said to him, we're going to give you material that's information and disinformation, and it's up to you to separate the wheat from the chaff. And Bill said, oh, I can do that because that was his main problem was that he had this big ego and he thought he was the smartest guy. That's how they dragged him in by saying you're the only guy who knows what you're talking about. And they used his ego to drag him in. And then, of course, he admitted to me and to Steinman that they had recruited him at when he was at university because he could
Oh,
speak Russian. And he was at University of Minnesota or wherever he was. And that he said, I worked with them. I worked with them. I didn't work for them. I wrote a couple of papers for them, but then I left. And then he claimed he didn't work for the CIA anymore. And then when the UFO thing started, he reestablished his contacts to use them to help do this sort of thing. And I guess he was the ideal candidate. And that you may be right about the FBI, and I hope somebody else files because I'm sort of blocked off because I've already filed. And but they would have to take a new request if someone sent them the document. And the 55 pages may have to do with the fact that there was all these stories that Bill was interacting with Russian people for AFOSI with the postcards. You talked about this, and that may be what the 55 pages is. But it does show that Bill Moore was more than just some lame brain researcher who was working on UFOs. I mean, I've never seen a file like that where it's like basically everything was redacted. And even the stuff that the 6 pages that weren't redacted, it was all blacked out too. There was literally nothing that you learned from this document. And so 61 pages. And I mean, I got Dr. Eric Walker's file, FBI file, and there was almost nothing redacted. And Bill Moore is just like, so the question is, what is their B1 national security in that file? And they would have to do it because it's so long. That was 1988. They filed for that thing. So after 30 years, they should have to release it if there's or another request for it. Or I asked for a mandatory review. So after so many years, you can request a mandatory review. And the way they walked around me was to say you didn't give me enough information. And they had enough information. They had like 3 pages of the document. I just didn't send them the whole thing, which is about 6 pages. So I guess we'll have
uh,
to sort of just struggle along and just keep playing the game. So,
something that I find kind of chilling, and I think I read it in your book, was that one of the things that AFOSI and these agencies were doing was developing psychological profiles of UFO people.
oh, that would make sense. Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I find that kind of chilling. Um,
But I guess they like these sort of games. They've got to know who they're dealing with if something leaks or whatever to to find out what your weak point is. Almost like the Russians. Like people would always say to me, I don't want to talk to Richard Doty. I don't want to talk to these people because they lie or whatever. And I say, well, that is because you go to the people. Like if a Russian guy is a drinker, he's an alcoholic, you don't discount him because he's an alcoholic or he's running all around on his wife. You say, hey, okay, let's go to the bar and take the guy to the bar. And that's you find out people's weaknesses so that if you ever have to deal with them, you know how to, you know, where to get them so that you get their weak point and you work off their weak point. So
yeah.
I don't, I just kind of find it surprising that Americans have allowed themselves to be profiled. It's one thing for them to profile me as a Canadian, but if you get the CIA, that was the big investigation that Dan Smith put. He went to the FBI and demanded to know why is Ron Pandolfi talking to him about UFO stuff. If the CIA is not in UFOs, why is Ron Pandolfi telling me all this stuff he's telling me? And according to him, he said they spent $100,000 AI investigation on Ron Pandolfi and came back and said whatever he's doing is part of his job. And because Dan didn't Dan didn't put up with anything. And it was this idea that if you're CIA, you're a foreign intelligence agency, you're not supposed to be spying on American people. So why is Ron Pandolfi dealing with UFO researchers if CI is not involved with UFOs? It doesn't make
Well,
any,
and same thing with AFOSI and
yeah,
even the DIA. They're not supposed to be messing with American
yeah,
citizens unless there's something that affects national security.
yeah,
So, or that affects some kind of connected crime. For example, they wouldn't go after a non-military civilian for drugs unless that person was selling to an Air Force person on an Air Force base. Then they would do that. Um, but in general, they're not supposed to. But I think they also bend the rules from time to time if they think that it's necessary. And another aspect of it is that these UFO conventions, MUFON, Contact in the Desert, whatever, anybody can go, you know. So
yeah,
somebody can be in the Air Force or AFOSI or DIA or whomever, and as a courtesy, they mention to their boss that they're going to go, and they're given the okay. Then go there and casually report back what they learned. That nothing illegal or immoral about that.
yeah, yeah. One question just occurred to me, an important one. Did I get if you talked to Doty a number of times, did he ever talk to you about this group of sometimes he calls them foreign former intelligence officers, and that's how Eric Davis talked to the two presidents because he was both the presidents were members of this former intelligence officers organization. Has Doty ever talked to you about this group and the claims that they worked through Senator Rubio and that they wanted to disclose this group of intelligence people and Ron I guess is running this thing or something like that. Did he ever talk to you about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's mentioned Doty has mentioned in these Twitter spaces that he calls it the advanced working group
Yeah,
that
okay.
he's with, even though he's never given the name of anyone else in the group. But he's claimed that that they're at least some of the people in the group are in contact with, Rubio and some of these senators about forwarding disclosure. And Doty has also claimed that he's been to Washington himself and been interviewed by the inspector general there. And they've compared notes, and I guess they got what information from him that they wanted. Now there's an organization called the Association of Former Intelligence
Yeah.
Officers, and they'll let anybody in, even me. I'm a member,
Are you?
even,
Cool.
even though I have no background in intelligence. But Eric Davis, I think at one point when President Bush Sr. He was either a regular attending member or maybe he was there to give speeches at, at
Hmm.
the at the Washington meetings. I think that Eric Davis made a connection there with Bush Sr.
Yeah, and he did Ford as well because he came to me. I've known about that story since the early 2000s when it actually happened because he phoned me up and asked me for Jimmy Carter's phone number. He said, you got Jimmy Carter's phone number. And I said, no, I'm a Canadian. How would I have a Jimmy Carter's phone number? And I said, why do you want it? And he said, well, he's not a member of this intelligence agency. He was never an intelligence guy. And Ford and Bush were. He talked to Ford and Bush. Now he wanted to talk to Carter. And it was all to do with whether they'd seen this Holloman Air Force Base film, whether it was part of the presidential briefing. So I don't know if he ever got a hold of Carter or found his phone number or whatever, but it's kind of an interesting development that Doty's claiming that are these Twitter space? Are we able to get these transcripts of or the conversations that he has on there?
Quite often they're recorded,
Oh,
but they're different people put the spaces on, and then Doty goes on as a participant and talks.
there's no overall log where you can search stuff or anything like that.
I don't know enough about Twitter to be able to tell you that there
Yeah.
probably is. There are
Because even the
people.
ones that I was on, I was trying to get because Doty came on one time. He said something very dramatic. I can't remember what it was. And I was asking Nicole, I said, Nicole, do you record? Was it recording? She said, yeah. And then I was trying to get a copy of that because I wanted Doty on tape actually saying, I can't remember what he said, but it was like, holy cow, he actually said on tape. So, because I'm very interested in this sort of development about these guys that he seems to be claiming are ready to disclose. And it's two former CIA directors, and one guy's 94 years old. I've heard various things about, and one that would indicate it might be what's his name, the big NSA guy, 94. You would know he's in the notes, the
Oh,
advanced physics theoretical working group.
yeah, yeah.
Inman, Bobby Ray Inman. That's what I thought. The guy's,
He's way up in his 90s now.
yeah, this would be the guy be 95 now, according, because that was last year I heard about this group, and it's so I don't know what they're doing, but it was almost the same sort of thing that they want to disclose, they want to put stuff out, and they're all these high level people, and so I just wondered what Richard Doty had mentioned on these spaces about these details. You said he's never mentioned the names, but
Mhm.
that seems to be.
But he said that there have been, former directors of the CIA. I think he hinted that uh, James Woolsey is in the group.
Oh, okay, yeah, that would make sense.
And interestingly, James Woolsey and I graduated from the same high school,
Oh, is that right?
In Tulsa, Oklahoma. Except he was about 12 years ahead of me.
Okay. Well,
Um,
yeah, Wozy would make sense because you hear all these stories about him being brought in to brief Bush and all sorts of stuff, and he did have the experience, he and his wife, in the 70s. So,
I will
uh,
say this about the Wilson Davis document. It's real. And I've heard a lot of nonsense about it,
yeah,
being fake, but it's real.
yeah. Well, I was the one that started moving, and I only leak. I always think like I leak all these documents, and nobody else has leaked documents. Like, if you know the story, I mean, there was a pile of major researchers had that document for 10 years, and they sat on it, like waiting for the hatch, and then they'd have the goose that laid the golden egg or something. I mean, it's like the same. And then the alien autopsy document that was actually admitted, Kit Green said is actually a real document, and that didn't go anywhere either. It got sort of immediately attacked, and so I've put a bunch of stuff out. The Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group notes, I put those
Yeah.
out. I had the President Johnson UFO study. I put that out. Robert Wood's study on UFOs for Douglas aircraft. He was furious when he found out I had those notes. And he said, "Where'd you get those notes?" I said, "Oh, some guy bought them off eBay for 29 bucks." And then he admitted that they were real. And they had this, this thing they were trying to do, 68, they were trying to back engineer, and they were trying to hypnotize abductees to find out what they've been told by the aliens. Just fascinating stuff. So but nobody else is leaking any documents. Like there's nothing except the stuff that's always turns out to be phony, like the MJ-12 and the new Majestic 12 documents. They're all interesting, but they
I did check with the Lyndon Johnson Library on that UFO study, but they did, and I
yeah,
trusted the guys that I talked to. They sounded honest to me, and they said they couldn't find anything, that
yeah.
they have a copy
Have
of
you
it.
have you have you seen all the file? I can send you the file if you want. I've got 100 pages of the
Yeah, please do.
yeah,
Please.
the guy's name and his classification and his badges that give him the security clearances and all this kind of stuff, and his name and what they did is they had all the right names, like in terms of if you look at Tom DeLonge's group, it was exactly the same. So they had the head of Lockheed Skunk Works at the time was McDonald. They had an Air Force general from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They had a top physicist. They had just all the same people that Tom DeLonge was using, the same classifications of people that I'm going like, man, they couldn't, especially Lundahl. They had Arthur Lundahl, and nobody would have known who Arthur Lundahl was when this manuscript was written in 1970. So it's a manuscript that was written about the the study, but it was never published. So it's all handwritten. It's kind of hard to read. But the conclusion is basically what the government is putting out now, that yeah, it's for real. There's actual metal ships and stuff, and we really, beyond that, really don't know anything. And then supposedly Johnson said to who was it that was putting the study out to them and said, tell McDonald, you've got your study now, get the hell off my back or something. It was kind of
Yeah, that was a funny thing because he asked the study to be done to get McDonald off his back.
yeah, yeah, that's the thing. He was friends with James McDonald. And then there was this coincidence that you have the guy that was with the school in Australia who talks about James McDonald coming to the school and investigating the school thing and saying he was working for a study for President Johnson. So there was that backup that McDonald had been at this 1966 or 67 school and claimed he was working on this study. So there's a lot of stuff that you and I probably like today. Everybody just sort of grabs onto the latest story, but you and I realize that there's a lot of this stuff that has gone under the bridge so far, and that
Mhm.
people just they aren't being cautious at all. They're just jumping all over this stuff, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they don't realize what they're up against. That if this is the most highly classified secret in the United States, it's going to have the best security and the best counterintelligence program. And as Eric Walker told us, you're up against the windmills. Leave it alone. There's nothing you can do about it. You're wasting your time. You're never going to be given the answer. And at the time, we didn't really know what he was talking about, but now it all makes sense in terms of what he was telling us was true, and that
yeah.
it's
But
been 40 years.
the thing is we don't know what the truth really is or what it is that they really do know.
Exactly, yeah. And
Uh,
but they're never going to tell you. They're going to hint. They're going to give you these little clips that sort of tell you there's bodies and crafts and stuff. But people really think that they're actually going to someday announce it. And you even have I'm just tracing a news story about we are going to try to interview the guy that the CIA was doing this. Had made some success in psychic stuff. And so if you get into this whole thing about consciousness and about this kind of stuff, that there's this element involved, they haven't got a clue what's going on. If they don't have a clue what's going on, sure as heck not going to release it to the American public. Everybody just thinks it's like an alien from Mars or Venus or Alpha Centauri or something like that. And the more you look at it, the more complex the phenomena gets. And you start to realize that they, and in many parts, really don't have the answer either.
yeah. And look at they can't even get the Epstein files released.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, there's all this back thing where, somebody wants to block it. There's all sorts of ways to block stuff, and it's in the archives, and that's what happened with the Canadian investigation. Is now they're saying, "Oh, come put your stuff in," and it was written by the science advisor to the Prime Minister and stuff like that, very high level. And they basically just took the Wilbur Smith story from 1954 and say, "Oh, he didn't discover anything, and he was working privately on his own time and stuff like that." And it's just the same cover story that they've used back in 1954 and didn't even recognize the fact that the woman that ran the project was at the University of Ottawa, and that's where Wilbur Smith's files are. And there was all sorts of stuff that he claimed that he may have been right or wrong, but he claimed, the top secret memo and all this kind of stuff. And they just sort of ignore it. And all they're doing is gathering material. And when it comes down to it, to me, if you give them a bunch of material, it's like a black hole. It's never gonna come out. If they're not, the Five Eyes met in the end of March on UFOs, March the 25th or something, according to Nick Pope. I mean, nobody's heard that. Nick Pope put that out. I mean, if do you think they're going to tell us what's happening at the Five Eyes meeting? No, it's like a black hole. Everything you give them is going in and it's got not coming out. And
Uh-huh.
people just actually think that because they paid for it, that the government's going to release it, and that is the farthest thing from the truth. That
What is the status of Stan Friedman's archive? Isn't it in Canada?
It's in Canada. I got five. I can send you the pages. I got 30,000 pages. I photocopied. The main thing I got was actually there. I got the Cuban Missile thing. That was the first thing I said. Have you got the Cuban Missile story? And they said, yeah, we got it. I photocopied that because he had a source. So I have the actual letter from the guy sending them, and they're talking about it and stuff like that, where the Cuban fighter jet disappears in front of the other fighter jet. And so I photocopied a lot of stuff that they had there. And they were working on it because Stan had it in his garage, in his basement. He had everything, and it was like stacked to the roof. And the archivist told me she went in there and said, Stan, how do you ever find anything? He said, well, I'd have a secretary, and he had like just piles of stuff and he knew where everything was, but it was just a total mess. So when they got the files, they had nothing. I went in there and told them, I said, okay, look for Phil Class stuff, look for MJ-12 stuff, look for and to giving them categories to try to break this stuff in because they had no idea about UFOs whatsoever. The only reason that the University of New Brunswick grabbed it was because he was such an icon in the province that the province wanted to keep his files because he was this famous guy from Nova Scotia. And yet the archives, it's an archives that takes like files for property, people's death certificates and stuff. They've never done anything outside of just ordinary government sort of files. And so they had no idea what they're doing. So I sort of led them, and then they had the problem that they said, well, what do we do with these notes? Like you'd have little pieces of paper where you just take a note on a phone number or something. And I said, no, put that in a box and put that all in one sort of file. Don't throw that stuff out because somebody like you or me will see it and they'll recognize the name and the phone number and it'll be important. So I
Yeah.
was I was sort of giving the instructions on what to do, but they were having a hard time. I think they had four people working on it full time, and because he kept it in the basement, a lot of it had mold on it. So they had to do the demolding stuff, and it was costing them a fortune to do this. They're still working on it, and now they got the other problem is that they're taking all the names off of everything, the confidentiality stuff. So they're doing all that stuff. So I've got about I was doing 5,000 pages a day. I've got thousands of pages. I can send you just in a link, like a OneDrive link, and if you can take a look at it. And I pulled some of the MJ-12 stuff, but they were basically just they showed they had the one actual palette that was there that I hadn't even looked at yet, and it was a palette of films. And he had all the films, all the documentaries he'd ever done, and stuff like
Uh-huh.
that. It was just an amazing collection. And this was I can't remember how many they said how many boxes it was, but it's a massive collection, just massive, massive, massive. And it'll take them years to go through this collection. So I'm not sure where they're at. I was there when they sort of first opened it just before COVID hit. And I photocopied everything I could. I didn't read anything, so I haven't really read it. I just looked at it and I just photographed, realized that you can read it when you get home. Just photocopy it. Don't sit there in the archives and read it because you're going to spend all your time just on one or two boxes to try to do it. So I've got, I don't know, 30,000 pages or whatever, but there's millions of pages of material that Stan had.
Uh-huh. Yeah, this summer I'm going to go out to the National UFO Historical Records Center in Albuquerque,
Oh yeah.
big operation. I'm going to do some research there.
Yeah.
Spend a couple of
Yeah,
days.
there's some big collections I've seen. There's the one in Sweden that they claimed they were the biggest. Now they're claiming what's his name's collection is bigger, but that was basements of these apartment blocks that they had that they allowed, and they had all these autistic people that were able to sit and do menial, like looking at certain things where they get obsessed with it and stuff like that. Who were working there, and the government was hiring these students or whatever, these autistic students, and it was just massive collections, room after room after room. And I remember they were going after Adamski's collection when I was there. They had the massive collections coming in from all around the world. There was just stuff, and then I remember there was a binder, MJ-12 binder. So these people were going through, and I go, MJ-12 binder, and I opened the binder and I started looking at the stuff, and they went, "Come on, we got to go. We're doing it." And they didn't have time to put the binder back on the shelf, and they had a whole collection of MJ-12 stuff. And I go, "Oh, look, I can look at it," but I didn't have any time, so it was kind of unfortunate. We were only spent like a couple hours, and I was just walking, a couple of hours just walking through this collection. It was just a mess.
Uh-huh.
And it was
Uh,
all paranormal stuff. They had, famous mediums and stuff. They had their whole collections. They had a room just with Spanish UFO stuff, massive collection of Spanish UFO material with Spanish reporters and
Umo.
investigators. So,
Do they have
and
Umo in there?
yeah, so so there's a lot of stuff we can look at, and I guess we'll stay in touch. And if you ever hear of any of these, give me a thing on these Twitter things where Doty's on there. I like to listen to him, and I think he's pretty consistent on the stories. I've heard a lot of stories that he's told, and he's pretty consistent. So. Whatever he's telling, he was telling 20 years ago, and he claims he's sort of converted, and he's on the straight and narrow now, but I'm still very interested in this idea that this group is claiming they're going to disclose, and they've reached out to some people to help them, but it didn't go anywhere after that, and I do think because of this thing where they brought up the ambassador, that to me it immediately indicated that Pandolfi had some hand in this thing as to what was going on with this document. But it was the classic Bill Moore. Come to this hotel room and they check all the plugs to make sure there's no wiretaps. And it was just like, holy crap, out of a spy movie.
You know who they did that with?
Who
Do you
did?
know who was the person they were doing that to? Do you know?
I know, but I don't want to wreck his story. I can tell you off camera. I can tell you who it is. But he started a project. He was called in on this project, and he spent a lot of money and time on his own. He's a film guy, so he's
Uh-huh.
I know him fairly well, and he sort of got burned by the whole thing. And I'm not sure where it is now, but I can tell you off camera who it was. And
Okay.
I was very interested because it did look like it was going to actually come to fruition. That this was actually going to happen. He was going to meet these people, and they were going to go on backlit camera and stuff like that. And then it was like every UFO story, just sort of like whoops, suddenly fell apart, and suddenly you're sitting there
They
holding the
did to Linda
bag.
Howe. They
But
did that to Linda Howe.
yeah, they killed her HBO documentary. Yeah, that was the whole thing.
Yeah.
They killed that documentary, and that would make sense that they're trying to manage the story. It's like when Chase Brandon came out, this whole idea about Roswell. He said, if you want a good read, read the book. If you want to learn something, read between the lines. This idea that if they know you're working on something, they want to come and help you, but they want to direct you rather than kill you. They want to direct you in the wrong direction or in a direction they want you to go to control the story. They want to be out in front of the story, which is what Area 51 may be about, is trying to get in front of the story that it was about to leak or something. I don't know. And
Well,
so
if they ever want to use me, I work cheap.
yeah, it's an incredible story for a spy story. That's how you could set it up in terms of if you were a writer. That's what they're sort of looking for. That's what Tom DeLonge was willing to do is write it in a fictional manner. So then they can give you material and nobody really knows except you and I would realize that story where that story is coming from, but the average public wouldn't know. Or you put it in, they put so much stuff in X-Files, like the gifting field apparently is in the last episode of one season, and then there's something else in the first episode. They've got something else that was a significant event that really happened, and they stuck it in there just like a joke. Or in the Tom DeLonge's Monsters in California, the scientist in the document in these Monsters of California is Eric Walker. And then they asked him, "Is that because of Eric Walker?" And they said, "Yeah." So they stuck Eric Walker's name in this Monsters of California, and that's what they do. They stick this stuff in there, and it sort of gradually gets out, and they play these little games. I think they're sort of like you and I. You like the puzzle game, and I think the intelligence people like the same thing. That's why they did the bird code. They'd always have these codes, or if you watch Open Minds Forum where Ron Pandolfi's talking, and it's all in poetry and rhymes and riddles and stuff like that. And unless you know all the code names, who's the footman, who's the princess, and all these crazy games they play, you have no
You
idea what's going
waste a lot
on.
of time trying to figure all that stuff out. You
Well,
just waste.
that's what they like, eh? They put it. They were doing that in World War II, where they would use codes on the front pages of newspapers, where you'd know take the fourth, the fifth, the seventh letter, or whatever, and this would be the code. So It's been done, and that's why I tell people these people have done this since World War II. They know what they're doing. They're 100 times more significant. You don't even understand how the game is played. Even if you're an intelligence guy, it's a hard game to follow. And so you and I are in this sort of mess where we're never going to figure it out. We're never going to know for sure, and we just sort of wait for government to disclose, and I don't think they ever will. They'll give you the basic story, but it doesn't make any sense why they would. As I said, there've been 14 administrations that have dealt with the UFO subject, and they've all done the same thing, which would indicate whatever they're doing at the top, everybody thinks what they're doing is legal. And it's the thing they have to do because it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat, they've all done the same thing. Nobody's come out and said, well, I think we should, drop this thing. And everybody's played the game and kept the secret, especially if it's a presidential emergency action document, then the president absolutely knows what's going on. He's running the show, and they've all played the game and kept this ultimate secret for whatever reason. And I guess it's got because they don't
Well,
understand and they don't want to give it to the Russians and Chinese, and they think they'll rule
another
the world
another
if they can get it.
aspect is if the president isn't told, it serves for plausible deniability, and he can
Yeah.
honestly say that he doesn't know.
Yeah, they may come to him and say, "We'll tell you if you need to know, but stay out of the limelight." Because that's what happened to when I was brought in by a big Trump fundraiser when they wanted to brief Trump, and they said, "Well, Trump's not going to tell them." I said, "What do you mean not going to tell him?" Well, not going to tell him. I said, "Who's not going to tell him?" Well, they're not going to tell him. I said, "Well, he hires the CI director, hires the national security, he hires the State Department, he hires all these people. He can fire anybody he wants, like what's happening now. You can fire people by the thousands, and if you don't tell him, he'll fire you." And the idea that the president if he hires all these people and then they don't tell him, well, who's to blame? You hired the people, they're your friends and neighbors or whoever. And so then he said, yeah, I never thought of that. And so like they're going to give him this briefing. And yet when Semivan came forward, and I think Semivan's trying to tell the straight truth, is this idea that it's an emergency action document and Congress has no right to know, and that's how they're keeping it secret. And it's basically something where the president just said at one point, uh, these people get to know, and we're going to run this, and it's totally secret. It doesn't go to any agencies. It's just run by this couple of people, and that's an emergency thing, almost like the same
Yeah,
as.
but that may be technically legal, but it's just not right.
Oh, it's not right, but that's how you run, like Mount Weather. The people want to know, say, I pay taxes. I want to know what the plan is for if there's a nuclear attack, or I want to know Secret Service is apparently one. I want to know where the president's motorcade is going to go in the next couple of days or whatever. And that's all this. And in America, because America, it's all fear. I mean, it's like there's enemies, there's Russians and Chinese and Afghans, and there used to be the Vietnam and the Japanese, and there's all these enemies. And if you say everything's okay, you have no budget. But if you say there's all these enemies and project all this fear, then your budget goes up and your power goes up. And so I think that's a lot of what this is.
Pentagon budget is up to a trillion dollars.
$1 trillion, yeah, and this is the whole deal, and that they're not working on this. Somebody quoted, they quoted some CIA director or whatever said, if there's one chance in 10,000 that this is going to be turned out to be true, we're studying it. It's just they study everything. They, magicians and everything. It's like the idea, if they discover a drop of water, they'll immediately start to figure out how to drown someone with it. It's like everything is a weapon. Everything can be militarized. And so you look at everything in terms of, because if you don't look at everything, the Russians are definitely looking at everything. The Chinese have a system where they don't even have to ask permission. They just put it in there. And so you can create this fear situation that the Chinese are way ahead of us. You hear it all the time. Oh, they're way ahead of us in UFOs, and the Russians are ahead of us and we need more money and all this kind of stuff. And you're basing it on this fear thing, and everybody's making lots of money. And but I don't know about you, but I just don't think there's any way that unless they're forced to, that they're ever going to disclose.
No, I'm not optimistic
Yeah.
about big disclosure. I'm
Yeah.
not
Or
optimistic at
even
all.
the aliens, the idea that the aliens are going to land in 2027. I'm actually doing an interview 2 days from now where they're going to make this contention. And I'm going, you actually seriously believe that the United States of America today, they're going to land and they're going to allow them to walk the streets of America, reptilians and mantids and reptile grays? I mean, this is absolutely insane. Doesn't make any sense at all that it's not the world. that the aliens aren't going to disclose either. The aliens are playing these games, and the government's playing games, and I guess you and I are one of the lucky people because we like to play puzzles. So even if we don't figure it out, we still learn a thing here and there, and you feel pretty good when you finally uncover something that makes sense. That you find a document or something that supports something that you contend is right. So I appreciate the fact that you do it and you don't do it for money. I don't do it for money. That we have no, axe to grind and we're just here trying to figure out the mystery. And so I respect you for all the work you've done and let's stick together and keep
Thank you.
communicating, especially these Twitter things. We're
Yeah.
Doty.
Let me see what I can find out about that.
Yeah, because to me, I listen to everybody. I don't, people will assess them. They're not going to listen to these people or not. Those I listen to everybody, and as I sort of try to track them, and everything they say I catalog, and later on down the road I'll decide whether it's real or not. But if somebody's putting stuff out, they're putting it out for a reason. So these Twitter spaces are new. I'm sort of almost like you. I'm sort of out of the loop now and how this technology works, even how to get on a Twitter space. But
I'll be if you want to go on, offline sometime, I'll show you how. I mean, I'm on a user level, but I'm not familiar with the technicalities of,
yeah,
getting archive uh,
yeah.
data, all that
Because
kind of
there's a
stuff.
lot of important information going on there when you hear the people talking. I mean, that's a lot. Because the thing I can't remember what Richard Doty said, but I was just shocked when he said it. I said to Nicole, I said, "Man, we got to get this. Have you got the tape from this?" Because I can't remember what he said, but it was like, "Oh, I couldn't believe he said it." And that's what you listen for. You're not really paying attention. But if Richard Doty's on there, I'm sure they're gonna to listen, or these new intelligence people that are running around, and you try to see is their story consistent? Are they adding anything? Because you'll see the stories are growing, like Elizondo's story. I can't talk about that. And then suddenly he's talking about it. No, well, I can't talk about this. And suddenly he's talking about it. So somebody's overseeing him and he's going back and getting permission, almost like Jim Lukatsky said, my job is to take highly classified material and move it down to lower classifications. And then I'm going, what? It's like, really? And you start to see that this stuff is leaking, but the way they like to do it is through these little puzzles, these little code things and stuff like that, where if you're really paying attention, you pick up what they're saying. And you and I have it's stuff where most people that have come in the field today only came in 2017. They have no idea about all these games that have been played and how intelligence works and stuff. And they're just sort of waiting for the next UFO video to come out. And that's how they get burned so bad, is that everybody thinks that it's going to be solved by the next story that comes out. So everybody's waiting for the next story. And then they all jump on the video and everybody talks about it. And then someone comes up and says it's a hoax. And everybody goes, oh, okay. And then they wait for the next one to come out. And they're so easily led because they sort of believe, and everybody wants to get the clicks. Everybody wants to break the story, be CNN breaking the news, and they all jump on it and they don't check it. And we're in that sort of world where they're dumping all sorts of stuff into the field and
Yes.
everybody's just all over it. And it's just like a total mess now.
Well, back before the internet, the intelligence people actually had to do a little bit of work.
Yeah.
Now all they have to do is go on Twitter, go on Facebook, go on
Yeah.
wherever, just throw something out there.
Yeah, or in, like when they were trying to build more of this thing with the aviary, where they were using code names for different people or whatever, because they were always afraid of phone taps and stuff like that. But now, I mean, it take 2 seconds to get into your computer, and they've got everything. They know exactly who you're talking to, all your telephone calls. They got everything, and they don't even have to do any work. They can just tap into all the major UFO researchers' computers, put them all together, and they know exactly what's going on. They don't have to go into the field to do anything anymore. Whereas in those days, they had to go run a phone tap, and you could phone to see if your phone was tapped and stuff like that. They actually had to sort of put a puzzle together. Now with the internet, it's just so easy to gather material, and that's what the idea. They're just sort of grabbing stuff by the terabytes every day. And then if they need something to go back 5 months ago, they can actually go back to that time and space and which phone calls were coming in and track it. And it's a world where they've got all the resources and we've got no resources. We're just
That's
sort
right.
of waiting for someone to leak something. So, but it's been exciting. Would you do it again if you had to start all over again?
This,
Yeah.
yeah, I wish I could have started sooner,
Oh
really. I
yeah.
think I could do a better job, and certain people might be around that have passed away, now, and yeah, I'd do it again. I
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
this is my thing. Uh, Intelligence and UFOs. That's what
Yeah.
it's all about for me.
Yeah.
And the two are, in my opinion, the two are joined at the hip.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I always see it like the Super Bowl that we got to play in this it's a major story if you understand what's going on. Most people don't, and that's okay. But if you realize it's an important story, then you realize like, wow, I mean, I got to actually play this game. It was like it's like, wow, at the, dealing with intelligence people and high level people and stuff like that, where I got, my 15 seconds of fame was I got to talk to Dick Cheney, ask him the question, the ultimate briefing question and stuff like that. Like it's just been a thrilling game for me. And again, like you, I wish I'd known a little bit what I knew now in terms of talking to people like I remember when I had the conversation with Tim Taylor and then the phone call with him later, and I didn't know who he was. I had no idea. I knew he was with NASA, but I didn't know, who he was or whatever. And I said, man, if I had known who he actually was, I would have paid a little more attention to what he was saying to me, and I would have asked him some questions. I didn't know. I just he showed me some stuff, and then he disappeared after a couple of hours, and then years later, I find out he's this super secret guy that is one of the top guys and stuff like that, and I had no clue. So that's the thing is you look back and
Yeah, well, it's hard to know everything.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you do the
But
best you
yeah,
can.
you had a lot of things in terms of MUFON. We haven't even gotten into that. I mean, there was a lot of MUFON stories that you were on the board and you knew guys like Schuessler and she had the Men in Black. I don't know if you told you the story about the Men in Black and guys like that who were reliable people that worked on big cases and stuff. So you've seen some big cases come through and if you could go do it over again, you would spend more time talking to people that later on that oh, I should go back and talk to this guy. He's dead because a lot of the big people are dead now. They've all died
Mhm.
off. And I had lots of conversations with Stanton Friedman. I didn't know what to talk to him about. Now I would have all sorts of questions for him and stuff like that. But
As far as I could tell, Stanton Friedman really believed that the MJ-12 documents were authentic.
yeah,
Because I sat in coffee with him, and at breakfast and looked at him in the eye and raised my objections, and he'd just say, "Well, I know they're real. I know the MJ-12.
yeah,
I
yeah,
know." I don't know if he was saying I know MJ-12 is real or that the documents are real.
yeah. I guess he sort of got caught like Bill Moore was the fact that he spent his whole life on it or most of his life. And then he would look really stupid. Like he'd taken money from different groups to do studies on the documents and stuff like that. And he was just the ego couldn't accept the fact that he'd been wrong about something.
Well,
And
he did tremendous research. He really did good
oh
research.
yeah,
The problem is he never found any official confirmation of MJ-12.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I mean that's the golden fleece. That's what you're trying to get.
yeah, yeah. And that would break. But I can't see them admitting that they're beyond the fact that they say now that there's there was a study going on, but nobody gets to the point as to okay who is running the study, how is it actually operated. Now that's my big thing is to find the highest level people that you can and find out what they know rather than going to the people on the street that somebody's got to know what's going on. So I spent my whole career doing that is trying to find who's the guy that actually knows what's going on. And that's why I spent so much time with the presidents. And then I realized like that may not be the thing. And experiencers and intelligence people. And, I've chased a lot of intelligence people around and gotten a few hints that they sort of know, but they really don't know the whole story either. And some event says that very clearly. He makes the challenge that I'll bet you a year of my salary, my pension salary, that the government has no clue as to how this thing, what they're dealing with. They got bodies and crafts. They don't know what they're dealing with. And, he's pretty adamant about the fact that they've made some discoveries. And then they asked him, was it UFO? And he said, no, no, it was sort of psychic discoveries. So he said, that's and he said he couldn't believe the shit that they had actually come up with, but it had nothing to do with UFOs. I don't know if you heard that interview where he said, I walked around for 3 months with the stare. My wife said, I was with the lost stare in my eye that he just couldn't believe what he'd heard. And they said, you want another briefing? He said, definitely not. He was so terrified by the first briefing. He said he didn't want another briefing, but
Well, they may not know the ultimate disposition and the ultimate intent of these alien groups, whatever they are, but I would like to believe that they've recovered
oh yeah,
craft.
they have. Yeah, but that's what some event says. Because you got bodies and crafts doesn't mean you know what you're dealing with. So yeah, he says, yeah, they got by. He definitely says, he said they got bodies and
But
crafts.
it's a start. The bodies and crafts are a start. That's what we need is confirmation
Yeah,
of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that may come in the next little while where there's gonna be enough pressure where they're gonna have to sort of admit, yeah, they've got some hardware or something like that. But I mean, there's so many complications, and I started another book where I'm going to talk about the complications. You know, this thing about you give it to one company, Elizondo's hinted that you're going to be massive lawsuits. You give it this company, you didn't give it this company, and all this kind of stuff, and it's just something I guess they really it's a war thing where you're spending lots of money on it and it's you're going to try to beat the Russians to it and you can see the technology implications and to hell with everybody else. It's we're gonna use this for technology and that's I don't know. That's why I don't really want to help him. I'm not really interested. My idea, I even said to Jack Sarfati, he was telling me to keep quiet and take something off or whatever. I said, Jack, you're an American. Your idea of national security, I'm a Canadian, and we've been threatened to with invasion and stuff. My idea of national security is a little bit different than yours. I'm not taking it off. And it was sort of like about Trump being briefed by him going to brief Trump. And I said, you don't tell me what to do. I'm not American. I'm not an American. I don't, I'm not worried about your national security implications. So.
Okay.
It's wonderful. So let's keep in touch, especially on the Twitter thing. And I hope we can do it again, maybe with Nicole, because she always likes to go for the deep questions
Yeah.
and
Okay.
she's been a great resource in terms of figuring out stuff. She's done a lot of work too, and I don't think has got enough recognition for what she's done.
Yeah. She does a lot of digging, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for inviting me. I
Yeah, I'm
really,
glad you're doing these. I heard that interview and I said, wow, he said, because you do a lot of stuff in the sort of, you come on the spaces and stuff like that, or big conversations, but you sort of stay in the background and sort of listen and stuff like that. And I go, oh, it's actually, we can actually have a conversation. So I appreciate, we've never had a real, back and forth conversation. So I'm glad we did it. And I'm glad maybe people will learn something from this in terms of what they're doing today, because you and I have done this for a long time. And I think we both got the same warnings is be careful what you're doing. You're up against the what do they call Greer was told by that lawyer guy for Appropriations Committee, you're up against the varsity team of all black budget programs. Be careful.
yeah, yeah,
And it's the varsity team of all black budget programs. These guys, they're the best of the best, and they're not going to give up easily.
yeah, that's for sure.
Okay, let's talk again soon.
Yeah.
I appreciate your
Okay.
time.
Thank you, Grant. Good night.
Okay, bye bye.